Heroes Square as we pass by.
It is not necessarily open every single day of the winter. So this is what you can see on the right-hand side, which is called Budapest Castle, which is also built for the Millennium festivities as a replica of various historical buildings from all over Hungary, merged into one construction in order to symbolize the history of the country. A museum dedicated to the history of Hungarian music, which is also a concert hall. The Vajdonyat Castle, actually, you can see again the dark colored building on the right hand side behind the Hero Square is a museum too. So there are plenty of other such institutions here. On the left, which is basically the cuts of a circle of one kilometer. The central memorial area, where you can also see these columns, these steel columns on the left hand side. Some of them are shiny, others are rusty, which columns are to victims of the 1956 uprising. That was one of the major uprisings in the world, and actually the first war that broke out between two communist countries. So one of the major events of the uprising was when the statue of Stalin was pulled down. Was one of the iconic events. You can still see photos on the internet and in various on the elections.
The Soviets
that were held
defeated the Germans
right after
here,
the war,
but then they stayed.
In which the Communist Party gained only 12% of the votes, despite the Hungarian communists were being brought around the country during the uprising with the trucks of the Soviet Red Army earlier
Hungarian communists
during the war. So this way, despite cheating on the elections this way, the majority of the votes, and the winner party was the Hungarian Smallholders Party, which was a conservative political movement. And they formed the government, but the Russians were so strong here, particularly with their army, that they managed to push the Hungarian communists into the government as coalition members. And once the communists were inside the government, they could start kicking out its key personalities one by one, could change the constitution, and could make Hungary a communist country. Hungary saw us in other communist countries that lasted until 1953, when Stalin died, and this changed the political style of many communist countries in Central and also in Eastern Europe.
1956, some of the
why Hungary stayed a communist country.
Went to Moscow,
of course,
and the
system
troops were
became
sent
a
in
bit more
and put
liberal
down the more
than
liberal
earlier.
government.
Generally, Hungary could get rid of the Soviet Union and the communist regime in 1989. Only, by the way, Hungary was the first country where it happened, because Hungary was always the most Western-like communist country, and because of that, Hungary was like a model, like a Western-like model to other communist countries to follow us. Where you can find also apartment buildings with shops on the ground floor, because the Grand Ring was also built on the turn of the century. Earlier it was a belt road outside the city of Pest. So in the Middle Ages it was a dirt road used by merchants. And there were a couple of more highlighted institutions built on the Grand Ring too, like the famous New York Palace. You can see next to us on the left-hand side, which houses one of the most famous cafes, one of the most famous historical grand cafes of Budapest, called New York Cafe. This church is one of the oldest buildings in this area. From the times, actually from the late 1600s, early 1700s, when this land was just outside the city of Pest, and there was basically nothing around it. The church was only built for a funeral church, an area where people during the plague epidemic were brought to and lived here in quarantine, because this land was outside, further away from the city of Pest. Where we stop, you can see the central street of the pedestrian zone, the main street of the pedestrian zone, called Vati Street, that you can look into the way we proceed a little bit. The statues on the left indicate the location of the Museum of World War I, which is a part of a beautiful big complex called Castle Garden Bazaar, which building is built by the designer of the Andrássy Avenue and the opera on the Andrássy Avenue, a gentleman called Mr. Miklos Ibl, which is a wonderful and one of the most representative projects from the late 19th century, when the former royal gardens were rebuilt to a public area. You can see around us on the left hand side, which is an open air park now, where also public events are held. You will also see the funicular, which is a cable car you can see running down right now from the top of the hill. It's a very easy counterweight system. The way one carriage goes up, the other one comes down. Funicular behind it, and also with the Gellert Hill and the Liberty Statue. Come back to Pest and we'll drive.
This is a bridge we just came
we
across.
turn left onto the riverbank. You can take another look at the Margaret Bridge. On the left,
Close.
you can see the details of the Parliament, which explains why the building was so expensive and why it lasted so long. Which is also a very, very symbolic building for the entire country. It was made out of Hungarian construction materials only by Hungarians, which had a really wide range of meaning then, because there were all the different ethnicities living in Hungary then, including the architect, the head architect called Imre Steindl, also originated from an Austrian family, but he was a Hungarian citizen, and the professor of the Technical University of Budapest.
There's a Roman
Another black block
village.
shows that the Romans built.
11th and 12th century Roman stones were used to build a Romanesque church. In the 14th century, it was reconstructed in the Gothic style. After fire in 1723, it was restored in the Baroque style. It was restored several times more in the 19th and 20th centuries. The communist government wanted to demolish it, but church officials managed to save it. This church was built on top of the remains of a Roman fortress built in the 2nd century. Under the glass floor is the camp commander's room.
In the Middle Ages, actually after the entrance of the Ottoman Turks, converted by the Ottoman Turks to a mosque, which is a fairly typical process. In the church, which you can find among these medieval niches, which is a fairly interesting construction because it looks like a mihrab niche. You know, the mihrabs in mosques are those niches that indicate the direction of the prayer, which is the direction to Mecca, all the time. Mosque. Of course, when the Habsburgs came in and swept out the Ottoman Turks, they built it quickly back. Any European standards, you know, it's typical to tribal communities. Even today, if you happen to go to Central Asia or to the Middle East and you happen to meet tribal people there, you would find them very, very proud of their identity, which is based on their ancestry.
So
this means that
Mary,
Hungary
the queen
was
of the
made
country.
a Christian land. Technically, it was made a Christian land forever, because Hungary always had a Christian ruler, even though it was a spiritual Saint Stephen. Because Saint Stephen offered him a job in Hungary to be the first bishop of the country, and he offered them, you know, a bunch of people to convert. I mean,
this altar houses the heel bone and vertebrae of Bishop Saint Gerard, who was buried here in 1046. It's a very nice pedestrian street with shops, where you can see lots more shops and lots of people. I'm sure this side used to have 2 lanes of traffic, like that one, of Budapest at night.